Hey, and welcome to another episode of the Girls to the Front podcast. I'm about to do the June recap, and the irony of me recording this on the 9th of July is not lost on me. But we're going to go through everything I've been listening, watching, reading, sharing, and doing throughout the month of June. And I'm just going to start things off with probably my most played song of the entire year. I can't wait for my Spotify rap already because 1,000% this song has already made it to number one. So the song you're going to hear, which I'm just going to get straight into it, it's called Sitting Down in the Shower. It's by Toodles and the Hectic Pity. I cannot describe what this song does to me, but the bit where Callum screams I'm just waiting and waiting for you to leave me hits me and makes my teeth hurt. It is perfection. So I'm going to, here we go, play song one. So you may or may not have guessed that June has been a particularly hectic month, and this is why I'm only just getting round to recording the recap now. But it has been hectic, but filled with some really awesome stuff. So I have been on a plane more times this month than I have been on a plane in the last 4 years. So I went to Glasgow first, Prague second. So I went to Glasgow to present some work on the play research that I do. I attended the International Play Conference. I got to make 2 presentations there. One was around my work around youth voice and giving young people a voice in research. And the second presentation was around how play, it's around how the whole idea of the research came on looking at like how the pandemic had impacted play and how the pandemic had impacted the wants and needs specifically of children for play. But what it ended up being was just looking at changes in play over time. And then what that ended up being was that actually children ask for the same thing over and over again, and we just keep ignoring them. And that's ridiculous. So made those 2 presentations. It was such a cool experience to go to a conference that was quite different to like the stereotypical academic type conferences, because it was filled with some really lovely, accessible and very physical presentations and some very physical stuff that you could go visit and look at around play, which was really cool. And it was a really it felt like it just had a really lovely positivity to it. But the thing that just echoes over and over throughout these things is what the fuck are we going to do about this? Because the amount of times I go to conferences and I go to events like this and we're all saying the same thing over and over. And I kind of made a point of it in my 2 presentations that I made of being actually this now needs to be about a call for action. It can't necessarily just be us telling each other what we already know, because that's not going to lead us anywhere at all. We need to start doing, we need to start actioning all this stuff, and we need to then tell the people that can make this change. Those are the people that we need to be presenting to. It's all well and good, but you are kind of preaching to the converted on some level. All of these people sat in the same room as you that are listening to you obviously have a vested interest in what you're talking about. So yeah, of course we're all doing it, and we all believe in it, and we're all trying to action it as much as possible. But where do we go from here? How do we get these messages outside of this room? So Glasgow was awesome, and it kind of just gave me a huge boost of confidence in terms of where I'm currently at with my research, and just the whole idea of I just need to keep going on this same path with my research, because it really does make a difference. But yeah, around youth voice, just listen to young people. They are the experts in the room on what they want and need. And there's so many ways that we can have their voices heard, as long as we acknowledge that we're not the expert, and as long as we acknowledge that it's not about us. There is an infinite amount of ways that we could change the world for the better. And then in terms of play, really similar. Just listen to what young people are saying, give them more time, give them more space, give them permission. Stop using play as a stick to beat people with. I find that play is often just seen as a bit of a dicking about thing. It's seen as an additional thing. It's seen as something that isn't necessarily part of the core curriculum, and actually are slightly different in Wales. In Wales, we have a play-based curriculum up until, up until key stage 1. But it's often just seen as something that's a bit of a joke, and actually the reality is that it is so beneficial on so many levels, and we can't ignore that. I just did a reel talking about that presentation as well, and I've managed to condense a 20-minute presentation down into a 60-second reel. So if you head over to my Instagram, you can see the findings of that. But yeah, I think it's also just about time that I celebrate the fact that I am Dr. Michaela James on a platform that has the potential to reach lots of different people who could influence change. So that was a big turning point, I think, for me this month, is the idea that I've got to someone's listening to this podcast being like, yeah, I fucking told you this months ago. But just embracing all aspects of myself and putting them, I actually think I recorded a podcast episode on this. But yeah, having that like way more embedded, because I really believe in my research. I think my research is really cool. And I think it does have the power to change the world. So that was Glasgow, and then moving into Prague. I was in Prague for 24 hours, so it's incredibly rushed. I really want to go back. It seems like a really lovely and really cool place to be. So I've now earmarked it as somewhere to go for the future. But in Prague, I did my presentation on youth voice again, but packaged it up slightly different, because instead of a room of play advocates, I was doing this for a committee of diabetes research. So diabetic practitioners, clinicians, I'm saying diabetic as if they are diabetic. They might be. And researchers. So it was slightly different the way that I tailored the presentation, but very much the same message. And the difference that you can make when you do listen to people. And looking around that room, you could see the kind of like light bulbs going off. And you then have this weird thing of being like, this thing that I believe in so much, and this thing that I think should just be common knowledge, and it should just be something people practice all the time, is like an epiphany for someone else. And someone came up to me at the end and was like, oh yeah, well, we often wonder why these things work in a lab, but then as soon as you take them outside of a lab, they don't work. And I'm like, yeah, because you just do lab-based research that's like really detached from the world. But if you involve those people in from that point, then yeah, you'll be able to make a bigger difference in the real world. So, but yeah, again, like a super rewarding experience and another big confidence boost in terms of like being Dr. Michaela and like being someone that knows what they're talking about. I've seen loads of memes and stuff recently and reels around like, oh, the minute you open your mouth and words come out that you didn't even think that you knew, and you hit this flow, and then you're like, oh my God, I do know what I'm talking about. I've had a few of those this month. So that's been really cool and really nice for my imposter syndrome. Although I do have to say it has been wild at times this month. I think because I've had these like huge peaks of confidence, I think on some level it's made me question my skills in other areas, or it's just made those whole things like a lot more heightened. So yeah, it has, like flying to Prague to know that I was giving this presentation was like, what the fuck? Do they know who I am? Like, should I be going? But yeah, it's been just really lovely to kind of feel validated on some level, I think, and knowing that my research is being respected. Because I think I always just see myself as like someone that's winging it, and someone where I'm like, oh, there could be someone else better doing this job. But having those moments and you're like, no, I am the right person at exactly the right time, doing exactly the right research and spreading exactly the right messages. So yeah, and then off the back of that, I had an amazing opportunity last week to speak to someone that I'd spoken to a few months ago for a swimwear range called Deacon and Bloom. But they wanted to get back in touch with me and do an interview with me around play and playing as an adult. So we spoke a little bit about that and how I advocate for play, not just in childhood, but also into adulthood, and some of the messages I have from Girls to the Front. And that was really cool. I'm excited to see that article come out and spread that word even further. So yeah, that was awesome. So I'm going to break up me just talking about what I've been doing this month with another thing that I've been listening to. I was doom scrolling through Instagram the other week, and there was a really cool video of a girl skating, and over the top they put Regina Spektor's "You've Got Time" as like the soundtrack, and it was either the combination of like the skating and the song, but I was like, this song is class. Like, although I had already heard it, if you've watched Orange is the New Black, it is the theme tune for that. I then sent it to my sister. My sister was like, I fucking hate this song. So yeah, but I think it might have been the combination of both those things, but I haven't been able to get it out of my head. So that's the next song you're going to hear. What else have I been doing this month? I feel like I've taken some big leaps this month. So I've started just throwing some stuff out there and seeing what happens. So for example, I just stuck some zines in the post and sent them off to various locations across the UK and was like, they're either going to be well received and someone's going to message me or someone's going to follow Girls to the Front as a result, or they're just going to put them on a shelf, not acknowledge that I sent them, or they will just never exist out. And that's fine. Any way is fine. Whatever the outcome is, it's another set of eyes that is going to glance over this scene. So I sent them to a few places. Obviously, one of those was Shelf Life in Cardiff. Fucking love Shelf Life. Like, the support that they give Girls to the Front is phenomenal. But yeah, so I've started doing that a bit more and just... yeah, so I've just sent out another batch on Friday to like an open zine call. So yeah, I'm like doing it with zero expectations. But yeah, just trying to like throw the message out there as wide as I possibly can. And I feel like the universe is pushing back on that. I mean, I've done 2 zine workshops this week, which has been amazing, and they've been a result of me just putting out that I do this work, and that, yeah, I just want people to know that they have so much value, and zines are a fantastic way of putting that in a very physical representation. So, you know, the idea that you can just create something off whatever is in your head, and there being no rules or constraints to that, and it having no idea what that might look like, but just having a space to be able to create without any parameters and stuff like that, and just kind of trying to push that message. So yeah, so I did one that was like a bit of a co-creation with teenagers, and we just used the prompt of what did you do in your day today, and then the other one then was a bit of a mixed group, and we just created zines on any topic that people wanted to, and we had some really great ones around mental health. We had some ones just around playlists and music. We had one around what do you do with your day, like how it's controlled by numbers. One that had some really beautiful poetry in. But yeah, just understanding that these things can just exist and you don't have to run them by anyone, but you have so much value that you should just put your thoughts down somewhere, like document, write them down, draw pictures, whatever way, shape or form. But if they exist and someone sees that, that might be the thing that they needed to see that day. During the second zine workshop I did, at the start, one of the participants was like, oh, so are you a Cardiff-based artist? And I was like, oh, no, I'm not an artist. And they're like, oh, so are you a graphic designer? And I was like, no, I'm none of those things. I just believe in the power of DIY so much that I've shoved myself into this space and then I try and promote it. But yeah, I was just like, no, actually, I do this because I believe in an ethos. I believe in the value of creating and documenting, and I'm trying not to gatekeep that by showing that it's super simple to do. And even someone that doesn't consider themselves proficient in artistic skills or creation, even I can do it. So it's that idea of just trying to break down as many barriers to something that could open up a whole world of possibility, and not trying to gatekeep that, and just trying to show people that you don't have to be really good at something to start something and to start putting something out into the world. So yeah, that's been really cool. Oh, it's just started to rain, so I hope you don't hear the rain on my roof. So I guess that also kind of feeds into what I've been sharing a lot this month. I've been sharing my own stuff. I'm trying to be my own biggest fan, because I think we should all be our own biggest fans. So just trying to like live that ethos and trying to self-celebrate and trying to put myself up there and trying to like really think quite positively of myself in an outwardly way, to sometimes try and convince my brain that if I outwardly project the idea that I think I'm doing really cool, valuable stuff, my brain will also then register, yeah, you're doing really cool, valuable stuff. And it's going to help shrink that imposter syndrome slightly, because yeah, it does get quite loud in there sometimes. On the topic of sharing, you may or may not have noticed that I have become completely obsessed with the Orca uprising. I think it is, whether or not it is just nature doing something, or whether it is a conspiracy that orcas are now facilitating an uprising to take down humans, I don't care. But I just think it's like the whole thing around it, this idea that you can just at any point decide to start an uprising. You can just at any point decide to start a revolution. I think that's really, really cool. So I'm going to go with Gladys knows exactly what she's doing when she's inspiring younger orcas to take down the boats, because she's trying to start an uprising. So yeah. And I also did a reel the other day that was like, just want to get Gladys on the podcast, to be honest, because I want to know. I want to know the steps that took towards starting to facilitate change and starting to put that, and now everyone's talking about it. Tiny actions equate to big movements over time. So I'll break this up again with another song I've been listening to. So this one is Sun. Oh my goodness, this is very hard to say in the speed in which I communicate. Sun Sign by Anxious. It's great. Now, normally at this part in the podcast, when I talk about things that I've watched, I don't have much to talk about. But this month, I've actually started diving into some stuff that I've meant to watch for a while now, and I should have watched way sooner. So the first thing is Filmage, which is the Descendants documentary, which has been recommended to me for a few months now, and I just haven't got around to watching it, but I finally put it on, and I loved it. I feel like sometimes you need this like emotional connection to people to then like really appreciate the music on like a new level. And watching the documentary was like realizing how and why the songs have been written are phenomenal. So that was really cool. I loved the part where they talk about coffee and the idea that as a band, they just wanted to be fueled on coffee. So they try and put like 10 scoops of coffee in all of their drinks to try and get that like full buzz. And now they're like, oh, you lot don't know how lucky you have it, because there's like a shop to get espresso in every corner. And we were just trying to seek that buzz through 10 scoops in our coffee. But it's a really cool documentary. Just around the band and like the iterations of the band, and it was I learned a lot from it, so it was really cool. And there's also a bit about the dad, and it's really heartbreaking, and it just goes to show that like for some people, like music is a big part of being able to express emotions and being able to like identify feelings and then grieve, but then also be happy and to feel things. And yes, that's a really cool insight into like songwriting and things like that. So yeah, I love that, and I would highly recommend, if you're a Descendants fan or not, just going and visiting that. It is on YouTube is the version that I found. And then the second thing that I have watched, and I can't stop thinking about it, is the Kathleen Hanna documentary. It's called The Punk Singer, and it documents Kathleen Hanna's rise basically with Bikini Kill, and then how then they fucking create this whole riot girl movement and inspire a generation of young women to rise up and to start just explicitly talking about topics that have been typically not discussed, and around the zines and the art that they created, and how Kathleen Hanna was at the forefront of this, and how like Bikini Kill became to fruition, and how at the time they were just a complete breath of fresh air, because they were this girl band. I'm using girl in inverted commas because I don't like the expression kind of tied to that, but and they were creating space for girls at gigs. They were calling out bad behavior at gigs. They were chucking people out. They were just like holding people to an expectation and to a standard of just being a good human that treats people with kindness, and then writing songs that spoke about problematic behavior and things like that, and it just at the time being so huge. So it was really cool to watch that. And then also how Le Tigre was then formed, and Kathleen Hanna's relationship with people around that time. And then in 2005 she kind of disappears off the face of the earth, and it goes into her Lyme disease diagnosis. And it just goes to show that I think even when you are someone that advocates for people to talk about their bodies and to talk about their feelings and to talk about their emotions, that sometimes you can also no one's perfect, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So she's fighting for a diagnosis of something that she truly believes there is something there's something not right about her existence and how she's feeling. So the first kind of part of it is that she doesn't actually want to admit to anyone that she's not feeling physically well. So when she decides to disband Le Tigre, she says that she's just mentally at the end of her wanting to be in a band. But the reality is that she's actually not physically capable to be in the band, but doesn't want to admit that. And then it talks about how she then fights for some level of diagnosis about what is going on, and then doctors telling her she's just having panic attacks, but she knows that's not it. And then just trying to advocate for her health and her well-being to people that just won't listen and just keep telling her that she's experiencing different things. And she's like, no, it can't be this thing because I don't feel like that. So yeah, it's one of those things where you're like, well, even humans that you think are fucking, you can't fight with them, and you can't, they know exactly who they are and what they're doing. Even then, you're seeing these people being told by like medical professionals that what they're talking about is in their head. And yeah, it's super eye-opening, and I learned so much from it, and I just can't stop thinking about how she inspired the Riot Grrrl movement and just her like presence on stage and her presence in the world. Like, imagine she didn't exist. And like, the thing I couldn't stop thinking about is that like loads of kind of stuff starts when she's like 18. If I thought of myself when I was 18, was I that, like, I couldn't imagine, like, she's putting on fashion shows and she's putting on art shows and she's like, well, this doesn't exist, so I'm just going to create it. The whole thing is just phenomenal. So like, she's going to college and she's creating art, and people are telling her like, oh, we don't like this art, we can't put this anywhere. And she's like, fuck you then, I'll create a space where I can put my own art. She sets up her own art gallery with a few friends that's just around like feminist art, and then she starts putting on fashion shows with the same sort of ethos. And it's just the whole thing of like, well, if these communities don't exist, I'm just going to create one myself. And then the kind of snowballing of that into Riot Grrrl and all this sort of stuff is so inspiring. And it just, I was watching it with like my mouth open and like sparks flying. It was like a huge like fire setter and spark producer. It was awesome. So I'd highly recommend, even if you're not into punk music, even if you're not into, if you've never heard of Riot Grrrl, even if you've like no attachment to Bikini Kill or anything like that, I just highly recommend going and watching that, just to see the power of what one human can do if they just live and die by their actions and values and create opportunities and create spaces, create safe spaces. There's a scene in it where I'm basically describing the whole fucking documentary, but there's a scene in it where they come together to write the Riot Grrrl manifesto, and they get lots of like-minded people in the room, and they talk about the conversations that I had. And actually, it's not even about writing the Riot Grrrl manifesto, it's not even about creating the zine, it's just providing this space for people to talk and for people to exist in without fear of judgment. This would be a fantastic opportunity to insert a Bikini Kill or Le Tigre song. But I've only just watched the Punk Singer. So the next song you are going to hear is Cinema Woes by Fresh. And the irony of it being called Cinema Woes and me never ever going to the cinema is hilarious. But I just think it's a beautifully written and constructed song. So on a same sort of level, I have finished reading Fix the System and Not the Women this month. And I have recommended this book to people, and I've said that it is a phenomenal education on how the system has oppressed certain groups and how it is the system and not the individuals within the system that have that are part of the problem, and how we have to stop victim blaming and we have to stop getting individuals to address these problems themselves. So in this kind of circle of women, it's trying to stop victim blaming in rape culture and things like that. But if you look at it wider, it's also trying to stop people that are in poverty being blamed for the reason that they'd have no money, because it is not that. It's the systems that oppress them. It's the wider systems that facilitate infrastructure that oppresses people and does not allow people to thrive. So I finished that book, and I do believe it should be read far and wide. But I was like, who am I recommending this book to? And then I started thinking about, okay, I'll recommend this book. And then I was like, why the fuck am I recommending this to like-minded people like me? We all know this. Deep down, I didn't need a book to tell me that it is the system and not myself that needs to be addressed here. There is stuff I can do to address the system, but ultimately, it is not me that is the problem. And then I was like, okay, so who do I recommend this book to? Who do I give it to? And then it's like, well, the people that will never engage with the book are the people that need to read that book. But how do you engage those people to read that book? It becomes this huge fucking mind-blowing thing. And I've got to be honest, spent about 24 hours feeling quite hopeless about the situation, because I was like, where do we go from here? What do we do? Like, this book ends by basically saying that we as women can talk collectively about our experiences. And a big thing to break down is the kind of stigma around talking about stuff that's happened to us, and acknowledging that it is not our fault. But it's also then, how do you fix the people that fucking cause these issues in the first place, that causes the kind of assault, that causes the derogatory, that causes the stereotypes and all this sort of stuff? How do you fix that? And it became super overwhelming for me, and I had to take like 24 hours just to feel these huge waves of emotion, because I was like, I just don't know what the answer is. I still don't know what the answer is. I would recommend this book. So it's called Fix the System, Not the Women. I think it is an incredibly insightful, well-written and accessible explanation of the systems that come to oppress certain groups. There are fantastic examples. I think if you read it as a woman, you relate to a lot of the experiences and you can almost identify similar experiences. That could be good or bad. It's either good in that you're like, well, I'm not alone, or it's bad in terms of, fuck, why is this happening so regularly to so many groups of people? But it's like, how do we take this forward? It's the same thing I was talking about earlier in the podcast around, if you're just talking to like-minded people that agree and you've created an echo chamber of people that agree that action needs to be taken, how are you ever going to get that action embedded in society? And I'm still very much having this as an open question in my mind, what needs to be done? It has inspired me to just keep going with what I'm doing and just trying to keep educating people and challenging people. But this book exists, and if you have someone in your life that might not be agreeing with what you're saying or needs to have some level of eye-opening, then fucking give them this book. But yeah, I recommended it, and now I'm thinking I'm gonna not recommend it to people that I think would resonate with it, because it doesn't need to be resonated with. It needs to be fucking actioned. So yeah, that's what I've read, and it's given me a lot of emotions that I'm gonna work with. This month, I have also been to see Spaced and I've been to see Buggin'. So they're going to be the last two songs you're going to hear to close out this podcast today. So the first one is going to be Not Yours by Buggin'. I think this song is phenomenal based off the lyrics within the song. It is talking about like dealing with the tokenization of being seen as a girl in hardcore music, and the fact that you are put into a category of like female fronted, and that you might not be acknowledged for being a band, but you're being acknowledged for being a person. So yeah, That's the first song you're going to hear. And then the second song is going to be Prove You Wrong by Spaced. I definitely have put this on the podcast somewhere before, but I'm just going to reiterate it because I fucking love it. And seeing it live was awesome. And yeah, so they're going to be the two songs that are going to play you out. I also feel like they carry the emotions of what I've just finished with perfectly. So yeah, so that's my June recap. I will see you at the end of July for another recap, but in between there'll be lots of other awesome Girls to the Front stuff going on.